All right, good morning. Hello, everyone. We are ready to get started. I want to thank all of you for joining today. I'm so happy to have you here. My name is Jennifer Morse. I am with MadCap Software, and today I am so delighted to introduce Ann Pillman, owner of Technical Information Solutions, a company that specializes in helping organizations manage content intelligently by promoting content reuse and single sourcing techniques. Today's session is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to be talking about the very important subject of role-based output. And why is this important? Well, applications today they're developed and they often have different types of users. And these types of users might have different roles when interacting with the application, or perhaps a set of training content. What this means is that these different users will have different needs depending on that role. So giving them exactly what they need ensures users are successful with the product or the service being used. So in this session, Anne is going to talk about best practices for this approach, setting up your projects to support this type of role-based deployment, including tips on how to work with developers and product owners to make it all happen and come to fruition. So welcome, Anne. Thank you so much for joining today. Before we turn it over, I just want to remind everybody just two quick items of business that we always like to cover. Again, this is going to be recorded. We're going to be sending a link to everybody when we're done. We're going to be sending over Anne's deck, any assets that she's using for this presentation that you're going to be able to use going forward. So not to worry if you have to pop out early, you're going to be getting all of that after the fact. Also, reminder that there is a question panel in the GoTo console. I would encourage you to drop in questions for Anne as we go today. We're going to do our best to cover as many as we can at the end, but whatever we don't get to live, not to worry, we'll send a follow-up document with questions and answers after the fact. So please use that question area for anything that comes up as we're presenting today. So with that, Anne, I know you have a lot to cover. Thanks again for joining and for putting this together. I'm so excited to be chatting with you. I know we all are. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Jen, for that introduction. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you today. Let me start out by giving you a scenario. Imagine for a moment that you're in a meeting or a Zoom call, and the meeting is to discuss a great new software application that your company's developing. So the software people are there, as well as QA and marketing and product planning, and you're there representing the documentation team. The marketing person starts out and gives an overview of the application, and then one of the software developers takes over and really gets into the details. Along the way, you're hearing things like, this set of users can do this functionality, but only these users can do other things. The application makes sure that users can't do things they're not authorized to do. And you also heard the marketing person say that maybe the application will be sold internationally next year. Nobody really asks for any input from you, and you probably are going to leave the meeting with your head spinning, wondering just how are you going to design the help for this application? It sounds like there are several user roles that will require different help, as well as perhaps translation. And perhaps you're starting to get a huge headache just thinking about it. So this was exactly the challenge I faced at Rochester Software Associates. And in this webinar, I'm going to give you some best practices and tell you how we implemented role-based help for two of RSA's products. Okay, so let's get started. Here's what we're going to be talking about today. First, I'm going to define how I'm using the term role-based help. Then I'm going to cover some important topics to discuss with your software development team, ideally before you start developing your help. Then I'll talk about what Flare features you can use to support role-based help. And finally, I'm going to show you how we implemented role-based help for two different RSA applications. The first one is WebCD, which is a web app, and the second one will be QDirect, which is a Windows app. So what is role-based help? In a nutshell, role-based help is help that's specific to the user's assigned role or application permissions, or the user's assigned language and country, or the user's assigned locale. So let's take a look at each of these in a little bit more detail. So a role is typically going to define what you can do in an application. You log into the application and your account's going to be configured with certain permissions that are going to allow you access to specific functionality. For example, an application may have order placers, and these people can only access the ordering part of the application. Then there might be production staff, and these people can access the production part of the application, and they may also have access to ordering as well. And then often there's a role for administrators, and these people would typically have access to all of the roles in the application. So it turns out WebCD has these 3 user roles plus 7 more. Okay, next let's take a look at language. If your application is distributed in different countries, you may need to provide help in 1 or more different languages. So I've listed 4 examples of languages here. And you'll see I'm using a standard way of showing the language code, for example, EN for English, followed by country code, for example, US, or down here, GB, Great Britain. The reason I'm doing this is there are country-based differences in many languages, which is why it's very important to use both the language code and the country code when you're describing a language. And you know, if you've ever watched British comedy shows on Netflix, you'll know for sure that British English can be very different than US English. So one note I want to point out, this is not a presentation about translation specifically, but we do need to include language as one aspect of providing role-based help. Okay, finally, what about Locale? A Locale provides an additional level of text customization within a specific language for users in specific locations. For example, you might find that ordering instructions are different for users in the New York City warehouse and the London corporate office, even though these users have the same language. So this can be represented by a locale. So you'll notice here I've added a locale designation to the language designation. So for New York City warehouse, we have EN, US, NYC. For London, we have EN, GB, London. Paris, France, FR, capital FR, Paris, and Montreal, FR, CA, Montreal. So if you're wondering why I have 4 locales listed and only 3 pictures, I absolutely could not find a good picture of Montreal that would be something that everybody would recognize. If anybody knows if there's an iconic Montreal landmark, feel free to put that in the chat. That would be very interesting to me. But anyway, moving on. So just to recap, what is role-based help? Role-based help is specific to the user's assigned role or application permissions, or the user's assigned language, which includes country, or the user's assigned locale. So depending on your application, you may need to develop and display separate help information for any combination of these different factors. So right here we have EN, US, NYC, and the role is ordering. And we have 4 different help targets right here. So just remember that language-based help is typically going to be handled by translation. So you're going to be concerned primarily with figuring out your user roles and locales. Okay, next section. Let's cover some very important questions that you should discuss with your software development team, or maybe even marketing or product development people. So it's likely that your software developers are going to have some coding to do to support role-based help. So ideally, you're going to want to have this discussion before you start setting up your Flare project. In a perfect world, that's what would happen. So here are 7 questions that you should discuss. So the first and most obvious thing to nail down is, what roles do your users have? And you're going to want to know, do you also need to provide language-based or locale-based help? So make a list of all roles, languages, and locales. For example, in WebSeries application, in RSA's WebCD application, there's actually 10 distinct user roles. The application is also configured to allow both language-based and locale-based help for each user role if needed. Okay, question 2. Can users have multiple roles in the application, or do they only have a single role once they're logged in? For example, in RSA's QDirect application, users only have a single role. They're either a basic user or an advanced user or an administrator. Each role is going to map to exactly one help target. So QDirect, there are 3 roles, but any user that logs into QDirect can only have one of those roles at a time. Contrast to WebCD, users can have many roles. So if you remember that list of 10 user roles from the last slide, every WebCD user can have between 1 and 10 of these user roles. So one path we started to go down with WebCD was we kind of wanted help for all user roles that a user had to be available at all times for every user, but we quickly determined that was logistically impossible, because to build a separate help target for every combination of user roles, that would be like 3 million different help targets, because there are so many user roles in WebCD. So instead, we took the approach that whenever you're using a specific role in the application, that's the help that you get. And the administrator actually has all the help in a single help window, so they're the person that can see all the help in the application. Okay, here's a really good question. Maybe for your marketing team or your software developers. Is there an actual requirement to restrict the help content by role? So in QDirect, and we'll see this later, historically the product manager did want to have the help segmented by user role. And several years ago, we made a change to allow the users of any role to see all the help, although they're still initially presented with the help associated with their role at first, and then they can switch help files if they need to. By contrast, in WebCD, there was a very strict requirement to restrict access to the content by role, and users who don't have a certain role must not be allowed to see that help content. Okay, question 4, we're getting through the list here. You'll need to know how users are going to access the help. As you'll see later in the demo, WebCD users have page-based context-sensitive help that they access by clicking a help button on each web page. By contrast, in QDirect, it's a Windows app, and there's just a help menu, and users will access the help content by just picking a menu option. So these different approaches to accessing the help system, in combination with our answer to question 3 on the previous slide, that kind of drove different decisions about how we were going to provide role-based help for these 2 products. Okay, question 5. You may need to provide access to a restricted set of help content before users have logged in. So in WebCD, the login page accesses a help file, a role-based target that contains just a handful of help topics that cover login and authentication questions. And by contrast with QDirect, they didn't feel they needed any help on this login. It's just a little Windows login dialog box, and there's no help available to users before they actually log in. So this is a very important question, number 6. By this time, you might be getting a good idea of how many unique help targets you're going to need to create and deliver based on the roles and languages and locales that your application is going to support. So it's essential to have a naming convention for the output help files that you're going to deliver to your software developers, so that it's clear what content is contained in the files. So for both WebSeries and QDirect, the output files are always zipped, for one thing. And the naming convention is language _ country _ locale _ role. So here's some examples of the zipped help file names that conform to this naming convention. This first one, EN, language, US, the country, NYC is the locale, and here's our role, basic user, advanced user, and there's another basic user. So the other thing for our products, the language and role are required in the help file name, but the country and locale are optional. So we typically shorten the naming convention to just the language and the role. If we don't have a distinct country and locale, which is fairly typical at RSA, this is the naming convention we end up with. But whatever naming convention you come up with, this is a very critical thing to have an agreement with your software developers. Okay, and here we are, number 7. Finally, you should know where the help files will be installed, either on the server or on the application's computer. So if we're looking at that naming convention again, our software developers wanted the help files organized in a hierarchy according to the file naming convention of language, country, locale, and role. So this is crucial to information for the software developers so that they could take our output from our Flare project and install it in the correct location, either on the server or when they're unpacking the Windows install. So our top level is language. We have a folder for a language. The second level is a folder for countries. Third level is a folder for locales. And under that is folders for various roles. So this was something that we agreed on up front, and the naming convention supports that, because whatever I deliver to the software developers, they know based on this naming convention where to put it in the file system so that the application can access it correctly. So the role switching menu that I devised for the QDirect help system relies on knowing where these output help files are going to be located, so that I could construct links to switch between the help files. And we'll have more details on that coming up. Okay. I'm going to let you look at this slide for a moment while I grab a drink of water. So here's how we answered these questions at RSA for the 2 different products that I'm going to show you. As you can see, the 2 applications have some very different requirements. So I did need to devise a different strategy for providing role-based help for each one. So the 2 things in common were the answers to questions 6 and 7. Both software teams wanted to use the same file naming convention, which is great. That makes a whole lot of sense, makes it easier. And for both products, the help for each role resides at the same level in the file system. Okay, now let's spend a few minutes talking about how Flare can help you create role-based help. So in a single word, that word is conditions. First thing you're going to do is create a condition for each locale or role. Just keep in mind that for language-based help, typically you're going to send your files out for translation, so you're not creating conditions for different languages. Second, you're going to tag your content with conditions as needed. After that, create TOCs containing the content for each locale or role. And finally, you're going to create Flare targets and set the conditions in the targets. Okay, here's our first step, create conditions. This is an example of WebSeries conditions, role-based conditions. I have my role-based conditions in a single condition tag set. I'm not going to go into detail right here about how to actually create the conditions, because those things are very well documented in the online help, the Flare's online help. But the important point I want to make is that you're going to want to create and organize your role-based conditions in a way that makes sense for your product or project or product. So right here for WebSeries, you can see all the different roles I have right here, and I've got conditions for each one of them. So the next step is you're going to tag some content for different roles using the condition tags dialog box. In your topic or snippet, you're going to select the content, right-click, choose conditions, and then you're going to see the condition tags dialog box come up, and go to your role-based condition tags, and you pick which condition you want for this content. So in this example, I'm tagging content for ordering role. Okay, here's a pretty hairy example of using conditions to customize a snippet for 3 different roles and 3 different targets in WebSeries. There's ordering, production, and administrator. One interesting thing about this snippet, there's a lot going on in this snippet, and one very important thing I've learned when working with conditions is I like to document what I'm doing. So if you look at this light blue text up at the top, that's an author notes condition I have. This is what I use to tag content that's not included in the output, but it's my notes to myself, so I have some kind of chance of remembering what I actually did in this snippet the next time I have to look at it 3 months down the line. So one point I do want to make, if your content's going to be translated, it's probably best to condition full sentences rather than, say, individual words in sentences, as I have done here. That's because the structure of a sentence can change quite a bit from language to language. And it's pretty challenging for the translators when individual words are conditioned in or out. So that wasn't really a concern for us at RSA, since we don't do translated help at all. Okay, next I want to show you just really quickly about using snippet conditions when you insert a snippet into a topic. Snippet conditions allow you to apply condition tags at a topic or master page level rather than only at the target level. If I wanted to use that snippet in 3 different topics in a single target, applying the role-based conditions solely at the target level would not work, since some of the content would always be conditioned out. So when you use snippet conditions, you're going to apply the conditions when you insert the snippet into a topic. So for each of the 3 different times you insert the snippet, you can set the conditions as needed for that instance of the snippet. So one big advantage to using snippet conditions is that then the content's displayed in your topic with the conditions applied. So if you have a very hairy set of conditions, like I did with the previous slide that I showed you, this really helps you see exactly how the content will be displayed. So to set snippet conditions, you're going to right-click on the snippet. You're going to choose the snippet conditions option from the menu, and then the standard condition setting dialog box comes up, and you can set include and exclude conditions that apply to that content. Okay, we're getting there. Step 3. You'll need to add topics to TOCs. And there are really 2 approaches to how to do this. If you don't have very many roles, say maybe less than 3, or if you don't have too much content, you could put all the content in a single TOC file, and then you would apply your role-based conditions to the TOC entries, and that's going to designate what's going to be included and excluded for which roles. And then you could use that same TOC file for each target that you need to generate. For WebSeries, it made a whole lot more sense to create separate TOC files for each role because, you know, for one thing, there's so many roles, and for another thing, there's so much content. So what I have here is, here's the TOC for production help, here's the TOC for the ordering help, and the administrator help is just going to include all of these sub-TOCs. So that's how that administrator help gets all of the help in the application. So with this second approach, every target that I generate is going to have its own TOC. And speaking of targets, you'll need 1 target for each combination of locale and role. So just thinking back to translation, remember translation is going to be handled by a translation agency, so you're not going to be creating separate targets for specific languages and countries. So after you create your target, open up the target and display the Conditional Text tab. And then you're going to set the include and exclude conditions for each role or locale. So right here, I'm just setting the include condition. This is the master help or the administrator role help. I'm including administrator, excluding everything else. Okay, so one other target setting that might be a little easy to overlook, it's on the Advanced tab. If you click the Advanced tab on the target editor, scroll almost all the way down to the bottom, you're going to see a menu that's called Content to Include. And there's 3 options for what content to include in the output files. The first option is all content. And as it says, this means all content in the project. You are not going to want this setting if you're creating role-based help. The next 2 options, content linked directly or indirectly from the target, or content linked directly from the TOC. Most likely you're going to want this last option selected. So that's just FYI, this is one of those easy things to overlook. And if you're creating your role-based targets and getting more content than you expect, make sure you check this setting. Okay, so at this point, you've created conditions, you've tagged content, you've created TOCs, and created targets for your content. Now we're going to do the fun stuff. We're going to do a couple of demos. We'll see 2 examples of role-based help that I created for RSA. So the first one's WebCD. WebCD is a web application. It is used typically by universities, hospitals, or large corporations, and it's used for printing and ordering documents and items. So the order placers might be students or teachers, and these people could upload files for printing, or they could select items from a catalog. And then there's production staff to run the high-speed printers to produce the print orders. And the other roles, as we saw in earlier slides, is other roles such as approver, invoicing, reviewer, catalog manager, and administrator. Okay, so now I'm going to click out of PowerPoint here, and I'm going to show you WebCD. Okay, so here is the WebCD login page. First thing I want to point out to you is that we do have help on the login page. So I've got a little help button in the upper right-hand corner. I'm going to click it. And this is one of my role-based targets in my project. And it's only got, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 topics that deal with login and authentication. Okay, I'm going to click back over to the login page again. Second thing I want to point out to you, WebCD is set up to support languages. So there's actually a language selection that I can click. If I click this French Canadian flag, I'm going to see all of my text turn to French. And that includes the help button up here, which now says aid, which is the French word for help. So behind this button, there's going to be French help. But I'm going to give you a little caveat here. I'm going to, tell you, I'm going to be honest and tell you the truth here. RSA does not actually translate any help. So for this demo, I kind of dummied up a little help file, the login help file with some French text. And because I know the naming convention and where the files should be on the server, and also because this is my development server, I was able to put the dummy French help file into the correct directory for the application to find. So if I click aid right here, so I'm going to see this same help file, but you can see I've got a little bit of French text there. And this might be a little hard to see, but if you look up in the address bar right here, you could see the file path is FR for French. And if I look back over at the English help, the file path is EN. So that's verifying to me that I've got the help files in the correct file paths for the server to know what I want to display. Okay, I'm going to click back over to WebCD, and first thing I'm going to do is switch back to English because my college high school French isn't good enough to continue this demo in French. Okay, so now I'm going to log in. And I'm brought to the ordering role, and I can see that up here in the upper left. I'm in ordering, and I have a help link available. I'm going to click that, and I'm going to see help specific to my role. It's all about using the ordering homepage. How am I going to order items? What about my account? Do I have any other features that I have access to? And this help file is one of my role-based targets in my Flare project. Okay, so if I switch back over to WebCD and I'm going to choose a different role now. Now I'm in the production role. Once again, I have a help button. I'm going to click that. And now I get help that's all about how do I manage production jobs, how do I ship jobs, how do I configure production options. And once again, this help file is a role-based target in my Flare project. Now I'm going to be an administrator, and I'm going to click help. And what I'm going to see here is a help file that includes all of these sub TOCs, all of the separate role-based help, help for all of the every single role in WebSeries that I have put into this master help file. Okay, let me just take a moment and show you quickly a couple of the things that the software developers did to support role-based help. Okay, from System Administrator, there is a look and feel option, and there is a locales option for text, overrides, and languages. So on this page, there's a list of various locales that I have available on my server. And this is a test server that you can tell because I have names like French test and invoice test. But here are two locales that are English, US, and then there are differences here. There's a corporate and a default. And then there's my French. And once again, who knows what invoice test is. But this selection right here, if I wanted to create a new locale, I could create a new one right here, and I could create a locale with different languages, or just something with different text strings. And if I click on any one of these, I could change any of the text strings whatsoever in the application. So this list of locales is something that the software developers programmed all this up, access to be able to implement and change these things. Next, I want to just show you for each user, how does the application know what to show each user. So I'm going to look at my user profile or my user account details. First thing, I'm going to scroll down this very long page. First thing every user has is a locale assignment. So you can see right here those same names from that locales page. And this is how the application is going to know what text strings to show me and what help files to show me. And if I scroll down a little bit more, I see my user rights, permissions, or roles. And this is how the application is going to know which roles I have access to and therefore which help files I have access to. Okay, let me just switch back to PowerPoint for a minute. And boy, I don't know why we got right to the beginning again. Let's see if we can get to the, let's see if we can get to the part we need to. Okay. Bear with me for a second. Okay, so to summarize what we ended up doing in WebSeries, the software developers really did a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of restricting access to the content and displaying the content appropriate to each user's role and language and locale, because every user's profile had those settings so that once they log in, the application knows what they're allowed to see. So given all of that, the software can open the correct help file for the user based on all of those user attributes. And as a help developer, as a help author, my primary task was to create the conditions in Flare, tag the content as needed, and create the role-based TOCs and the targets. And one side note, since WebCD uses page-based context-sensitive help, I also had to create help identifiers for each topic and alias files for each role so that our software developers could display the correct help topics for each application page. Okay, let's take a look at QDirect next. QDirect is a Windows application, and it's also used by large print centers to manage print jobs going to high-speed production printers. And I'm gonna switch over to QDirect right now. So since QDirect's a Windows application, I'm gonna launch it by double-clicking this icon on my desktop. And it'll take a moment to come up. So for QDirect, there's this little tiny login dialog box, and there is no help available before authentication, before the user logs in. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. And let's see. And this will take a moment to come up. So in QDirect, there are 3 user roles: basic user, advanced user, and administrator. And the application does restrict functionality by user role. Now in the help menu, we've kind of got a little bit of a hybrid situation where initially the user's presented with help for their user role, but then they can switch the help system if they want to a different role. So let me just show you how that works. So under the help menu, you can see I have 3 options here: basic user, advanced user, and administrator. I'm going to pick basic user. My basic user help comes up, and I have a little breadcrumb right here to remind everybody you're in the basic user help file. And the user can search and do what they want to, see if they can find the information they want. If they don't find it in that help file, they've got this user level menu, and they can switch to a different help file. And once again, the breadcrumb informs the user where they are. And if they still don't find what they want, they can go to the administrator help file. And then they've got a help file that contains all of the help topics in the application. So this solution's implemented completely in Flare. There's no software development needed other than for the developers to install and open the correct help files. Okay, let me switch back to PowerPoint. Okay, so the great thing about this user level menu that I implemented is it's really, really flexible. You can use it to switch between user roles or languages or help versions. Big advantage, especially with this set of software developers, is it did not require any software development support. And I just want to give credit. I got this idea from a MadWorld presentation by Scott Deloche, and I've given you a link to his presentation here. So attending that presentation is kind of what gave me the idea to move forward and implement that in my project. So I've created a demo Flare project to illustrate in a little bit more detail how I created this user level menu. So I'm going to show that to you next. And this demo project is going to be available to you after the webinar, so you'll be able to examine it and really at your leisure. Okay, first thing I want to do, I want to show you the output of the demo project first. And here we are. So this might look familiar to some people. This is the standard Flare, start a new project template for the HTML5 output. So I have welcome to our help center for role A. And if you look up here, this is our home page. I have a user role menu that looks exactly like the menu in the QDirect help. And we've got 3 targets: role A, role B, and role C. So if we're in role A right now, if I pick role B, you can see welcome to our help center for role B. Welcome to our Help Center for Role C. So let me switch back to PowerPoint for a second. Okay, so how did I do all those things? First thing I did is created a roles condition tag set and 3 conditions. Then I tagged some content with conditions. Then I created the 3 role targets, A, B, and C, and I set the appropriate role conditions on each target. And then I created the user role drop-down button on the template pages. For this demo, in this little demo project, I'm using the same TOC for each target, so I didn't need to create separate TOCs for these role-based targets. Okay, now I'm going to switch into Flare and show you these 3 things in a little bit more detail. Okay, so I'm in the project organizer, and if I look at the conditional text section, I've got 2 condition tag sets. The roles one is the one I created, so if I just had right-clicked and did add condition tag set, that's how I got the new one. And you can see I've got 3 condition tags, and I just called them role A, role B, and role C. And once again, in QDirect, this would have been basic user, advanced user, and administrator. So the next thing I did, I took this getting started topic. Oh, I don't know what that is. There we go, get rid of that. Okay, next thing I did, I took this getting started topic and I just conditioned 3 little bits of text with role A, role B, and role C. Okay, next thing I did, I created 3 targets. If I look at my targets folder, I had targets for role A, role B, and role C. And I've got the role A target open. I went to the conditional text tab and I set the include and exclude conditions for each target. So this is the role A target. So I have role A condition included and the other 2 conditions excluded. And I had to make that same selection for these other 2 targets. So the next thing is, how did I actually put the user level or user role button on the in the Flare topics? So I did that on the template pages. So if I go to the Content Explorer, so this demo project has 2 template pages, the home page and the other topics. And if I just switch back to the output again, here's our home page demo. Here's our home page, and here's our user role menu right here. And if I just switch into a topic, we've got that same menu right there. So I added, here's our home page template page. This little section of code right here is the user role menu that goes on the home page. And on the other topics, this little section of code right here is what creates the user role menu on all of the other topics. And that's between the breadcrumb proxy and the topic body proxy. Now, I did not code this in the XML editor. I had to switch to the text editor to code this. And this is the whole button. I'm actually going to switch back to PowerPoint because I do have a slide that shows this in a little bit bigger. Okay, so the user role menu, I implemented it with an HTML button. This command right here is what creates the HTML button. This is the text user role, and I have a little image associated with it as well. So if I'm gonna, let me switch back here. So we have the text user role, and you see the little drop-down arrow. That's the little image I have associated with this button. And the drop-down content, I've got 3 links right here. The A tags are links, and these are links to the startup topic of a different roles help file. So the question you might have is, how did I actually figure out this relative path, this link path to code up this, this A tag correctly? So if you think back to earlier in the presentation, one of the requirements we had is we had to know where the help files would be installed on the server, and we wanted them all installed at the same level on the file, in the file system. So that knowledge was super helpful to me as I was trying to figure out what do I code on the template pages to make Flare display another roles help file when I click that link. So truth be told, I didn't get it right the first time. I probably didn't get it right the second time. I took a best guess at the link path, and then I used my browser tools to inspect the output of the HTML to figure out what path Flare wanted to see on the template page to get the result I want. So again, you're going to have access to this demo project after the webinar, so you can for sure take a look at the details on your own time and play around with this. Okay, so summarizing up, how did I implement the user role menu in Flare? I used an HTML button. It relies on knowing where the output help files will be installed. And one thing I do want to point out with this technique, so these links, let me go back and show you these links right here. These point outside the project. So Analyzer and Flare are going to do their thing, which is really great most of the time, but maybe not this time because you're deliberately constructing links outside of the project. Analyzer is going to report broken links for the user level menu. And you're also going to see build warnings, links, which is 10056, link points outside project for each topic. And if you want, you can turn off this particular build warning. I'll just pop over to Flare and show you where you can do that. Under File, Options, and if you go down all the way to the Build tab, you can see all the numerical set of build warnings. And let's see if I can find 10056 because I did turn that off right here. All I did was clear this checkbox. So just one thing to mention, if you go and take a look at the link I gave you to Scott Deloche's presentation. So that's where I got the idea of doing this. He actually implemented his solution with a JavaScript, little JavaScript button. I chose not to do that for two reasons. One is that I simply didn't have that skill set to really implement a JavaScript. And another reason, probably more importantly, because I could have found somebody with the skill set, but probably the more important thing is that RSA, anything that's a script has to get vetted by software development. It has to go through security, assessments and stuff like that. So it really was the easier path for me to implement this with an HTML button. But certainly Scott's solution was a great solution as well. And I think maybe he probably did that because, if you implement this little drop down with a JavaScript, you're not going to get these alerts and broken links. Okay, we are just about at the end. Let's summarize the key points we've talked about today about creating role-based help. Probably the most important first step in creating role-based help is to identify combinations of roles, languages, and locales that you need to support. So this is going to tell you how many distinct help targets that you're going to need to create in your Flare project. Pretty much just as important is to talk with your software development team. Make sure that you're all on the same page about the requirements, about what coding they will or will not do to support role-based help. So in QDirect, they basically didn't want to do any coding. WebSeries, the developers did all the work. Okay, and then in Flare, you're going to use Flare to create the conditions you need. You're going to tag your content. You're going to create TOCs and targets for each combination of roles or locales. So thinking back to the scenario I gave you at the beginning of the talk, the meeting that you attended for the new application that your company will be launching next year. So maybe you left the meeting not sure how you're going to design the help. given all the user roles and potential languages that were discussed. I hope this webinar has given you a couple of different things. First of all, I hope you enjoyed the demo, because I always think it's great to see what other companies do, and demos are fun. But most of all, I hope that this webinar has given you some context for analyzing your particular situation at your company, so that you now have some ideas for how to implement role-based help for your projects. Okay, thank you very much. I just have my contact information up on the screen here. You can also contact me through LinkedIn, and I'm on the Flare Slack channel as well. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Jen again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ann. That was so very, very informative. And just a couple things I want to remind everybody. We have a lot of interesting questions, so I just want to take just a quick moment. Want to remind everybody that there's a great promotion going on right now where you can get 10% back on your next purchase. When it's like kind of like a gift with purchase. So anyway, if you have any questions about this, it's a great way to save money on additional licenses or training that you need. Please contact our sales team about this. So this will be clickable, it'll be linkable. So it'll give you a chance to redeem 10% back on your purchase. So please contact sales for that. Yeah, and then again, Mad World, we mentioned that earlier, but want to remind everybody that we have Mad World in Austin, Texas, June 12th through the 15th. Fantastic lineup, great sessions and workshops, and the support lounge. If you haven't attended in the past, I would encourage you, if you can make it, to join us. You do have an opportunity to get a registration discount through March 31st. So pop on over to our website so you can see all of the sessions and the presenters that we've got lined up for that, and we do hope to see you there. Looks like, okay, so Ann, lots of fun questions. In fact, you also got some great suggestions on some landmarks for Montreal, so that will be coming to everybody. Looks
great.
like
okay.
the Montreal Biosphere got a lot of thumbs up, so just FYI, yeah.
Oh, good. Okay,
yeah.
That's on my bucket list as a place to go, actually.
Same. When we can travel more easily. So, okay, I'm not sure we're going to get to all of these, but we have some really good questions that I want to start. I'll kind of just start at the top. Kind of going back to the very beginning of the presentation, and maybe this is about 15 minutes in, this is kind of where it came about. What if the user doesn't know his or her role? What if the user thinks, oh, I'm a standard user, but really they're a basic user, or vice versa? Any advice on how to kind of help with that scenario? We're talking about creating it from the role on the subject side, but what if the user doesn't necessarily know? Is that could that be a UX design when they come to a landing page or a portal, or what advice do you have there?
Yeah, I would say in general, that's more of a software development kind of thing, that, when somebody's logging in, they should really be informed in some way about what their role is. In WebCD, it's pretty obvious because the role is listed up top. In QDirect, it's not so obvious. I don't know. I would say that's more in the responsibility of the software developers and the UX people.
Yeah. And then kind of along those lines, in terms of controlling access there, like how do you know which role-based help to serve to the user? Is that controlled by how the user logs into the application and those credentials that are passed through?
Yes, absolutely. In WebSeries, every user's got a user profile, and that profile has their locale selection, and it also has all of the roles that they're allowed to access. So the application is doing, kind of like the heavy lifting in terms of, they're going to know for each user what they're allowed to access.
Okay, and then again, just kind of tacking onto that, I'm trying to find questions that are related to kind of carry on with the theme. So because of that, it depending on the access into the app, if you don't have those controls in place, it looks like there wouldn't be anything stopping a user from selecting. Like if I'm a basic user, I come in, there's nothing stopping me from going into the admin role. Is that also controlled by the application and the credentials passed through?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about QDirect, so that is the situation in QDirect. Historically, I mean, I'm going back maybe 15 years ago now. Those three user menus, basic user, advanced user, and administrator, those menus launched PDFs. And then we saw the light and we got MadCap Flare. The PDF situation was before my time, so I have no responsibility for that. But the product manager really, really wanted the help content segmented very strongly by user role. Then when we converted to Flare, we kind of had to maintain that same segmenting of information, but I was finding as a help developer, it's like I couldn't figure out where the content was. And I kind of went back to him and said, look, can we just open up this help to all the user roles? And he kind of agreed, but then the issue was I had no software development support to change that menu. So in a perfect world, that QDirect help menu would just have one entry that says, QDirect help, and it would launch everything. But I had no access to software developers to do, I don't know, maybe 4 hours of coding, 8 hours of coding to change that menu. So what I wanted to do was find a different solution that I implemented totally in Flare. That was my user role dropdown that was going to give these users access to different levels of help without needing to involve software developers who were not able to allocate any resources to make things easier.
Right. And then so in terms of access, so this is a good question. So if you change your role and the help page for the other role is still open, can you refresh and still see that help, or can you access that version of the help if you have the direct link? Again, maybe this has to do with the protocols of access behind the scenes that the company is setting up, right?
Yeah, there's for QDirect, they don't have that kind of authentication permissions or restrictions, I should say. There's no restrictions in QDirect. Now for WebCD, the application does in fact ensure that nobody's going to change help directories or like hack a browser URL or something like that. If I don't have permission for that help, the application does all of that behind the scenes to make sure that I'm not going to see, a help file I'm not supposed to see.
Okay. Right. So the safety in terms of who can see what can be controlled by the server then, serving up the content.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
So another question, I think we have time for a few more here. Was there a reason why you chose to explicitly include versus an implicit include, like the not set in the conditions? I think the person's asking about condition tags here.
Yeah, I think basically just best practice in terms of I always want to be sure I know what's happening with conditions, because conditions, especially like in WebCD where there's 10 user roles and all these different conditions. And, I only showed you the module role conditions. There's another 3 condition tag sets with a whole bunch of other conditions. And I want to be very, very deliberate about what I'm including and excluding. I don't want to leave anything to chance. So that's just the best practice, I think, when you've got a very complicated scenario.
Mm-hmm. And we're talking about a lot of different gears and Flare here that kind of make this happen. I thought this was a good question. It's why use targets rather than tables of contents files to control role-based help and builds? It seems like it kind of be a combination of these things, right?
It really is. It really is. So for WebCD, I do have a whole bunch of different targets, and I do have different TOC files for each target. And the reason I did that is just because there's so much content for each target. I guess if I wanted to, I could have had one huge TOC and I'm conditioning in and out various things. But just in terms of my mental process, if I'm working in the ordering role help, I just want to see those 150 or 200, 300 topics. I don't want to see all 1,500 or 2,000 topics in the whole help system. So it's just kind of a little bit logistical and makes it easier on the help author.
Right. A couple questions came up. You mentioned a really fun term, one of my favorite things in Flare, which are snippet conditions. And so the question, this was asked a couple of times, so I'll throw this out there. I'll just choose one of them. Can you talk a little bit, can you explain again what snippet conditions are? What do they do, and what's in it for me to use them?
Okay, so if you've got some content with various conditions in, and you're going to use that content, say a snippet, in different targets, you don't necessarily need to use snippet conditions, because you can insert that snippet in a topic in target A and set the role-based conditions on that target, and then insert the content into a topic for target B and set the role-based conditions on that target, and everything comes out fine. You're going to see the appropriate content in each target. So if you want to use that snippet instead in the same target, if you're setting the role-based conditions only at the target level, you're always going to be excluding some content. So the beauty of snippet conditions is if you've got a snippet that you want to use in the same target, and you've got various roles, various locations that you want to condition in different ways, every time you insert that snippet, you can pick what conditions apply to that snippet in that context in a single target.
Or target or topic? So yeah, I've seen it done both ways too. Maybe
yes.
too, yeah, like when you, the other thing I've seen too is you have a snippet with, conditions in it, and you might use that snippet in multiple places in the topic. But down somewhere in the bottom of the top, somewhere in the middle of the topic, if you've used that snippet, there might be some stuff that doesn't apply to a role. So you could, instead of having a different snippet for each situation, you could put all of your warnings or cautions or notes into a single snippet, for example, and control at the insertion point in the topic.
Yes, at the topic level, exactly.
Yeah, like what we see or what we don't see. So they're quite powerful. Yeah. We could do a whole other presentation on snippet conditions. In fact, I think we should probably do that, because there's.
Oh yeah, and in fact, the online help is quite good about this topic. So if there's any questions about how to actually use snippet conditions, simply go to the online help and follow through the examples there. It's quite well done.
Yeah, and I think maybe let's just do one more. I think this was a great question. And again, for everybody, if your question was not addressed live, don't worry. We will be taking some time to answer them and sending them out. But I just wanted to, because this is sort of towards the end before we deploy, the question was, do you have anything special for testing? For example, to check conditionality. Is that the right word? Am I saying that right? Do you test locally and or in some sort of dev or staging environment? What did you do in this situation from a testing standpoint?
Yeah, I do test everything. I have a build and release checklist that I go through, and I've got a whole bunch of different items on that build and release checklist. And the server I actually showed you today for WebCD, that is my development server. So during a release cycle, every Friday, typically, I build and release and deploy a new set of help files. So then every Monday morning, I go through and I run through some, whatever tests are appropriate to what I had done in the past week. So yeah, there is certainly a testing component to this.
Gotcha. Yeah, as we were talking about snippet conditions, we got a lot of comments on how cool they were. So we'll probably have to have you back in to talk about how fun and powerful they are, and how they can make all of your dreams come true.
Well, that they can, for sure. So.
Yes, indeed. Well, I want to thank everybody. I think, Anne, maybe you could swap back a couple slides just to kind of have your contact information up there again, if anybody wants to jot that down. Again, everybody's going to be getting this deck, but in case you want to drop down her email or her website there, please get in touch with Anne if you have questions. But I want to thank everybody for your time today. And thank you, Anne, for putting this together. This was fantastic. Definitely well received. Thanks to the audience for participating and being so engaged. We so very appreciate it. And we hope to see you on another webinar soon, or at Mad World, we hope. And do look for our email with this recording and all of the assets that Anne presented here. And we'll take some time to fill in some of these questions that we didn't get to live. So thanks so much, everybody, for joining. Appreciate it, Anne, once again. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of the week. And we hope to see you on another presentation. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.